Welcome, everybody. We'll give it another minute or so and then we'll jump right in.
I don't know why my video keeps going out.
It's good now. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. So, welcome everybody to session 4 of QP2U, maintenance facility construction guidance and lessons learned. This is our second to last session of the first run of this series. And thank you all for joining. So my name is Ryan Karapis, Marketing Director here at QualiPro, and I'm really excited for this session. And again, super appreciative of everyone's attendance and engagement throughout this series. And so really excited to introduce today's panelists. But as you can see, a group that needs no introduction. So excited for these three. We have our partners over at Agronomic Advisors, Jeff Corcoran and Dave Delsandro, and then the Director of Agronomy at Oakland Hills, Phil Cuffare. They're going to take us through today's lesson, and then at the end, per usual, I will field any and all questions from the chat. So please, throughout the session, don't be shy, ask questions, and we'll make sure to get those answered before we conclude. But thanks again for joining. And with that being said, I'll hand things over to our panelists.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. And, excited to be here today to talk about, maintenance facility construction. I know that it's for myself, it was definitely an exciting time as far as when we were going through the design and selling process, that all the way through the construction and then finally the move-in. But my part of the story is when I was at Oak Hill Country Club, we built a new maintenance facility, and I'm going to try to impart some of those experiences. And Phil Cuffare, obviously, I'm going to turn it over to you. And Phil, you can kind of explain yours is the most recent new facility construction.
Yeah, obviously, extenuating circumstances here at Oakland Hills Country Club with a clubhouse fire that really changed our landscape and put us in a predicament. And some of the lessons, many of you may not know, but I worked for Jeff at Oak Hill Country Club when we did the project. I think we opened Jeff in 2013. So to really fall back on those principles that we went through at Oak Hill really helped us navigate through, the circumstances here at Oakland Hills. And, it's a big project because it was looped in with the clubhouse as well. So, like we always say, if you want a new maintenance facility, burn down your clubhouse. The chances of getting one are pretty good, especially in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, where real estate is hard to come by. So
Yeah, that's good. And I think that Dave, you bring in a whole different dimension and aspect because, instead of like the full tear down, things of that nature, you went about it a little bit differently. I'll let you expound on that.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So in my last year or two at Oakmont, and then through our transition period there, when Mike McCormick came in to replace me, and over I'd say 2 to 3 year period, was called 2022 through 2021, 2022 through 2025. We really kind of piecemealed a facility renovation, did a lot of the work in-house, kind of acted as our own general contractors. The staff did the bulk of as much work as we were capable of doing, where we added a 6,000 square foot mechanics facility. Then that was the first step in a phase, and that enabled us to renovate the interior of the existing facility, change the existing mechanics facility into something else, repurpose everything. And then, the chain reaction of those couple events in that phase renovation over that few year period led to even further investment from the club into further expanding the grounds facility compound into what a lot of people saw if they were volunteer with the U.S. Open this last year, with adding even more facilities over time. So, in totality, Jeff, it was really over, I'd say, a 4.5 year period, phased in a very, very cost effective manner, strategically implemented with kind of in a non-traditional manner.
Yeah, and I think that's really good, and I think it leads into or segues into like our first topic because the fiscal aspect. Every club maybe doesn't want those capital assets to go into a new maintenance facility because let's face it, is that the ROI for the membership sometimes isn't real or tangible for them, even though there is a huge ROI for what we do on a daily basis and all the other superintendents do. So I think that's good. I mean, I to get over the fact that I guess that you realize, hey, we need a new maintenance facility. I think one of the biggest aspects when you come to that realization is actually selling it or building the case. Like, what, how do you quantify that to a membership? How do you explain that to a membership? I mean, Phil, I'll start off with you, and Dave, you can kind of take it from wherever Phil has it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question because I think I've been on both sides of the fence, whether it was when I worked in Chicago, where to quantify it, but then in Oakland Hills, it really came down to, they needed real estate for the clubhouse and parking to satisfy the codes in the area. We had always talked about a new maintenance facility when I got here in 2018. And, they were storing equipment outside. They probably had anywhere from $1.5 million to $2.5 million, whether it's tractors, all sorts of stuff outside. And, the mixing chemical area wasn't up to speed, I would say, by, regulations and stuff like that. Where we wash our equipment off wasn't any good. But, we always put a concentration on the golf course. And that's something I've always learned from Jeff. I didn't really care if the floors were dirt or whatever. We wanted to make sure the golf course was good. But when the fire happened, it gave us a tremendous opportunity at Oakland Hills to get some things done that we probably weren't normally going to dive into right away. And the club after the fire hired a firm, I believe it's JGA Club Partners or something like that. And they're basically big consultants and do big clubhouse projects really down in South Florida and kind of in that Florida. And they recognized right away, this is probably the beauty of this project is I really didn't have to sell anything at Oakland Hills. The consultant sold everything for us. And then it was brought to my lap and then I got a chance to speak about it. But really the heavy lifting was done by consultants that the club had hired for the clubhouse in really a larger scope project of the whole entire grounds of Oakland Hills. So when we dove into that aspect, they really did the selling on world-class facilities, Oakland Hills, nationally ranked, lots of championships coming. What's this landscape look like in 50 to 75 years? Stuff that I had been saying since 2018, but really wasn't on the docket to get done. And we would not be in this building right now if it wasn't for a big clubhouse plan and a master plan.
Yeah. How about you, Dave? Because yours is definitely a different perspective, but like selling to the membership, getting over those humps. I mean, what are some effective things that you guys did?
Yeah. So, I mean, give me a little bit of the positional culture of the club at Oakmont to help them give some context in these conversations very, very briefly. Is the club is so forward thinking and so strategically intelligent with financial operations, with asset allocation, with capital planning, with all of that, the constellation of all of that. And as long as I have been there, there's always been piecemeal over time. And it wasn't because it was not a priority or it wasn't understood that something needed to be done. It was that everybody in agreement at all of those different times over the last 20, 30 years when all these decisions and resources were allocated into different items of the club, the campus in general, you know, they were higher priorities at the time. And I'd be the first to tell you during my tenure, there's a couple of times where, I would recommend say, hey guys, yeah, it'd be great to do this to the facility, but it makes sense to do this for the members, or do this for the club, or do this for the golf course, right? Um, it was always a big focus on the functionality over the aesthetic, over the grandiose aspect of it, right? So, with all that being said, and it was also a time constraint too, is that when you're hosting a championship every 3-4 years, whether it be an amateur to a women's open to a U.S. Open or anything in between, like the operational windows to actually do something get so compressed when the focus, rightfully so, needs to be on the golf course and other club related facets to support not only the championship, but also then access to the members and the members' benefit in between those championships. So, all that being said, really, it was a new grounds chairman, really, that really took a more granular interest in what we did as a grounds department. And it wasn't really quantitative, like we have X amount of equipment sitting outside and we could be X more efficient. I mean, we could have developed and crunched all those numbers. It was mainly conversational, relational, right? Where that relationship and that member specifically, I mean, really drove the bus, Jeff. I mean, even where I wouldn't have even felt as comfortable doing that, because once again, in my product, I would rather put extra drainage in the third fairway than build a new facility, right? Understanding all those things, but so that member really taking the lead on that, and then him and I and a bigger group bringing other members in, and Mikey was part of this when he came on board during my transition out of Oakland. Was it we just built a team and said, okay, like we're lucky enough, blessed enough to have the opportunity to expand these facilities for the good of the staff, the personnel, the club. How do we do it? How do we get a nickel for a penny and still maintain the quality and the standard that is Oakmont? And for those of you who know me on the call, I mean, just personally, as cheap as they come, and I don't say that as a compliment myself, trust me. But yeah, so I mean, that's really how it kind of matriculated, Jeff. It wasn't some big formal, push. It was really just kind of gained momentum, and since it was phased, it wasn't like, oh, we have a 5-year runway of regulatory site work, permitting, huge cuts, fills, engineering, county ordinance, NPDES permits, special condition permits. There really wasn't any of that. So it kind of just like rolled one step at a time. And it was, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think that, there's a pretty good dichotomy between all of us as far as experiences. Phil, your hand was a little bit forced in the way of the fire, but you did need a new facility.
Yeah.
And then at Oak Hill, I mean, the cornerstone on our old maintenance facility was 1954. And, we were at 55, 60 people. Phil, you were at the shop. Dave, you probably visited at some point during your tenure. Is that, we had one restroom for 55 guys. Our break room probably held 10 people. We put up an awning every year for guys to eat outside. There was no air conditioning. There was no lockers. I mean, it was long overdue by the time Oak Hill decided to build a new maintenance facility. But I think that, we did have to go through the whole rigmarole of selling to the membership of why they needed to spend X amount of dollars on a new maintenance facility. We had membership meetings and just informed people of like how outdated our facility was. Because I think that one thing that's interesting is that most members have never been to the maintenance facility of their golf course. They could care less. And, I don't blame them for some of that, but people were shocked and kind of appalled that they treated their employees that way from a standpoint of having one bathroom. There wasn't a woman's restroom in the facility that was, anything to write home about, that's for sure. So I think that, like the first step for us was informing the people. We had membership meetings, and we actually took our maintenance facility moved it to a different area of the property, which was a little bit controversial at that place. But I think that in general, to kind of wrap that selling up, is that it really depends on what you have situationally, but like show members your shop, get people down there, take pictures, PowerPoint presentation, um, do shop tours, do visits so that people understand that, like if your maintenance facility needs an upgrade, that you inform them why. Phil made a great point. If you have, millions of dollars of assets that they purchase on a yearly basis or lease or whatever it is, and they're staying outside, like these are impactful things. And we'll get into some other stuff, but the other aspect I was going to ask you guys about is that, and I get this question all the time, and Dave, I think you get it too, is like, I think that sometimes people don't know where to start. Like, should you go see a contractor, an architect, design, build, whatever? I mean, Phil, what was your guys when, like I know you had contractors on site because of the clubhouse, but I'm sure you guys went through some formal process.
Yeah, our situation, Jeff, was so unique that, I think I asked you when you were here a couple of weeks ago, how long did you plan for the Oak Hill maintenance facility? And I think you said 2 years or maybe even more. Traveled the country, and they wanted to get our facility approved with one giant site plan for the clubhouse, and the job at order was to rebuild the clubhouse, and they really needed to get started that for the membership, so they needed site plan approval. So they told me, we formed this committee, and we're lucky in Detroit there's so much building going on that our committee was comprised of the best builders in the Midwest. We had an architectural firm on site who they designed the clubhouse. They also designed our building, but they had never designed a building like this. So we really relied on yourself. We relied on, I think I gathered 5 sets of plans, one from Marion Golf Club, one from Wingfoot, one from Muirfield Village, yours from Oak Hill. And I think John Zimmers had passed on some stuff from Inverness that hadn't come to fruition yet for him. And really the geniuses in the room were the committee, because I was like, a 2-week time period to design a, multi-million-dollar facility in the springtime was like, I mean, I didn't even know where to start. So really the professionals that were associated in our situation, the architectural firm, which eventually we just handed them over Oak Hill's plans and said, go at it, and then they compressed 2 buildings into one. And then the contractors that we have in site were outstanding on how to, so to say, value engineer this and build a high quality building that's going to last, hopefully 50 to 75 years, if not longer. But that was our situation, which was truly unique. We were up against a huge time crunch, and we really relied on the professionals in the room to guide us through it.
Yeah. How about you, Dave? I know your
Yes.
experience differed.
No, two quick takes. Yeah. So one, like, when referencing my experience at Oakmont, I guess I remember thinking this, zooming out at the time and being like, obviously I talked to other superintendents, drove around, looked at other buildings, but quickly recognized like the scope and the budget that we had. Like we had to take conceptual philosophies that like you employed or new buildings that we looked at and guys I talked to did. How do we scale them and scope them from a cost standpoint that we can use those conceptual philosophies, but we didn't have the ability from a cost standpoint to really build this thing out huge. And then I remember the big aha moment to me was like, it's a very diverse space. Like not many other industries in general do you have like admin, office, employee, personnel, equipment, maintenance, overall operations, pesticides, fertility, storage, use, right? All of those things. So like you said, Jeff, like where do you start? Where do you go? Like I personally reached out to an owner's rep developers group that did a lot of the building works with the clubhouse, and a local engineer. Again, like, hey, like you did this building, you built hotels, you built industrial facilities, you built manufacturing facilities, and to have in-personal conversations with everybody. and just tried to like take as much as we possibly could, and then kind of just, I don't want to say designed our own, but designed our own. Trying to take learning lessons from everybody, taking a super humble approach to it, and looking outside of the turf business also, and getting into some of these other manufacturing, industrial, commercial, personnel related structures, and seeing how we could adapt some of those philosophies to what we were doing. The second quick take, and I'll jump out. I get asked this a lot from clients, Jeff. I'm sure you do too. Like, hey, the club's talking about this. Where do I start? I think a great place to start is every club has a trusted general contract, right? To say, hey, step one, order of magnitude, conceptual budget. We want to build a building between 15 and 25,000 square feet. We need X heated space. We need, I mean, just, like pegboards, and hey, are we looking 2 million, 4 million, 6 million? Like, what's the site work? What's the construction? What's the regulatory process? And just kind of get that number that you can actually, some people can start to wrap their head around, knowing that we're starting with these very basic assumptions. And then as those assumptions change, scope and price fall. I think that, generally speaking, is a decent place to start currently.
Yeah, no, and I was going to piggyback on top of that is that most clubs, all, I mean, I don't want to say all because there's always exceptions, but like you said, Dave, that have contractors or potentially architects to get that information, that starting point, because a lot of guys need, cost per square foot, drill down on what type of building type you're going to do. You're going to do 6 foot of block and then a steel building over the top of it, whatever you decide or fits into the aesthetic. Like if you go down to like Aronimink, that building looks like it belongs on the facility, and those guys do a great job of maintaining it. Is that, like there are some mitigating factors at your club. How exposed is it going to be to the golf course? What do you need to do? Dave, you hit on site work. I remember we had to move like a 36-inch water main to build our facility with a 20-foot cut. Those are costs that are going to be associated with it that you're going to develop over time. But getting good people on, like build your team. Just like if you're going to do golf course construction and you have your architect, you have your contractor, you have people that are going to put input into that. It's the same thing with your building your maintenance facilities. Have the right team sitting around the table so that you know what you're up to. And I think that that planning stage, which we're going to jump into, is going to dictate a lot of the finances on the back end. And I thought Oakmont's a really classic example. I mean, your guys is a compound. You go from building to building to building, and they're all done really well. But you guys did it over time and a little bit more piecemeal. Where Phil, you were kind of pushed into having to redo the facility, and we were kind of in the same boat. But I think that the take-home point says that there's a million different ways to skin a cat, depending on what your financial wherewithal is at your club and how you go about doing it. Phased approach, you're going to build a whole new facility, but having the right team around so you can develop those costs and those sizes. And that gets a little bit into the planning and the needs assessment. Like, how did you guys go about, Dave, you can start off first. I've been picking on Phil, but like, how'd you guys determine all your space requirements?
Too many things, yeah. Number one, we kind of did our own site work to build a pad as big as we could. And there were, how should I say this? There were topographical inadequacies that we could not overcome with the means and methods that we had to build the pad, right? So we built the biggest pad that we could, number one, to try to get this first phase of this facility as big as we could, this add-on building, right? And then once we built that pad, we knew, okay, realistically, we can build this thing between X and X square footage. Now, this was the most painstaking, nauseating part of all of this. Then we went to the end of the process and worked backwards. It's like, okay, we're going to build an X thousand square foot facility. How do we design it or phase it? We said, okay, well, like we started at the molecular operational level what's the flow look like when you drop off a mower? Where does it go? How does it get to the lift? How's it come off lift? Where does it get stored on the line? How's the guy going to load the next morning? Where do we need compressed air? Where do we, and kind of start at that granular level and then work backwards into confirming that original assumption of space, height, positioning, elevation were going to meet the requirements of what we were looking to fulfill.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, Phil, how about you? You guys, I mean, your facility is very well laid out. It looks like you guys have plenty of space inside, but like just getting your space requirements and things of that nature down.
Yeah. So that required a phone call to you, Jeff, and lessons learned. I mean, it's I think the headline of this topic on the webinar, and reaching out to guys like yourself, guys to Paul Atshaw Jr. at Marion, Steve Rabideau at Wingfoot, and lessons learned. Where did they go wrong and where did they go right? And I mean, one of our first conversations, was add 5,000 square feet. And what you said, our situation was so unique because it was like almost you'd concentrate with the architect on what site where we were going to build, and then, our committee chair would ask, how big of a building do you need, and it would be 40,000 square feet. And then, with a 40,000 square foot building, you need X amount of parking spots. And, where we are in Detroit and Bloomfield Hills, there's a lot of rules and regulations around here where the township, they wanted to clean up some stuff around Oakland Hills, like where our dumpsters were located. They don't want to see some stuff from the road. So there were some, requirements that we had to handle amongst all this stuff. And we checked all the boxes eventually, but getting there, it was kind of going back and forth. Then, you bring in the civil engineer, and, it's funny you brought that up about Oak Hill. I forgot about that water main. That's funny, but we had to relocate like a 42-inch sewer coming across the road where our building was going to be built, and then it's drainage retention and, all this stuff and how they can make it work. So it's a lot of the architect and the civil engineer, and then the membership, of course, going back and getting approval for all this with a vote. And at the end of the day, this project took so many twists and turns. And, what if we just build a pole barn and don't finish the floors to, the finished product of what we got right now? It's truly, truly unique.
Yeah, I think that everybody needs it. Like when you're embarking on that project, right? Is that when you're talking about sizing of the buildings, obviously picking up the phone and talking to peers that have walked through that bed of coals before. But I think also too is just like, some of it's dirty work, right? Get out, measure your equipment, figure out how much space you're going to want between pieces of equipment. Those planning needs as far as sizing and space. I mean, I remember when we were getting into the planning phase, I reached out to Terry Buchan too, because, Terry did a bunch of grow-ins. He was a consultant and he had some sizes of, typical buildings all laid out, 10 by 10, 10 by 12. But, I remember like, Phil, I think you were part of this, is that when we got our original plan back and we tweaked our plan probably like 7 or 8 times, is that, we actually went through the step of laying out the whole entire building in lath and string. Because I was the type of person, like, when you put a dimension down on a piece of paper, I'm like, I don't know if that's big enough. But like to actually visually get in there and see the space, and we tweaked a lot of things just from doing that exercise. And I think that, making sure that you have those considerations, just like, how wide do you want your hallways? How wide do you, like different buildings or different aspects. But I do think you need to go out and see some places. There's enough people that have been building maintenance facilities that to get a set of their plans, take a look at them. You have dimensions, what works. Asking people, like you said, Phil, like, what would you do different in your facility if you had the opportunity? And, there's always going to be 1 or 2 things, but I think it's really important to make sure that you have those considerations. I mean, Dave, you hit on one thing I want to mention is like workflow see, you know what I mean? Like in how your building is laid out and as far as flow in there. I mean, like how much consideration did you guys put when you guys were building your compound? Because I mean, obviously with various buildings, it had to be pretty important.
Yeah, so unfortunately, Jeff, a couple of buildings were already fixed, right? So
Hmm.
how do we re-optimize, identify where our inefficiencies were in those buildings, and the buildings that we added around that, maintenance campus, how do we optimize their flow and operational efficiencies um, under the constraints that we have, right? Under optimal conditions within unavoidable constraints. And to answer your question specifically, I mean that drove the layout of the positioning, the orientation, the elevation, the exterior, the interior. That was the probably number one driving factor in all of those various aspects.
Yeah. How about you, Phil? I know that you got a great workflow within your facility, and obviously I saw some resemblance of Oak Hill, but you guys tweaked it and made it better. I mean, how did you guys take a look at like the workflow experience for the employees and things of that nature?
Yeah, it's one of the things that Seth Sheldon did, and he was tasked by our committee chair, and he cut out of colored construction paper to scale every piece of equipment we owned, which is, by the way, if you look at your pinky nail, it'd be like half of your pinky nail would be one John Deere Pro Gator.
Mm.
Obviously, I don't have the patience to do stuff like that, and Seth did. And so he cut out 21 of those for gators, and he literally measured every piece of equipment that we owned, whether it was on our property or in an offsite storage facility that we rented because we didn't have enough room to house it here at Oakland Hills. And then we kind of made sure, and he laid it out on, a conceptual layout throughout the shop. And then, we went through and we went to Oak Hill, I think, for your PGA championship, and Seth dove into like how your shop was laid out and what he liked and what he didn't like, and stuff like that. And then, we did our Chem Ferd area, and obviously my time at Oak Hill, and what you have at Oak Hill, I thought was just world renowned. And if we had to make a tweak, what would that tweak look like in there? And I think when you come down to like, we have 55 to 60 employees, you got to be able to have a locker room that houses 55 lockers, right? So when you start fixing all this stuff into spaces and the architect's really starting to work, and, a 55-person break room, what does that look like? You start to gather your spaces real quick, and how many bathroom stalls do you get with 55 people? There's certain codes you have to satisfy when you do all this stuff. And then, Jeff, and you probably can speak onto this, like fire breaks in the walls, like 40,000 square foot building, requires to have sprinklers, I believe, so, they knocked our building to like 39,280. So they didn't have to sprinkler the whole building, and then you start getting weird stuff organizational wise like that,
Yeah, and I think your sizes are going to dictate it. I mean, just real quick. I mean, I'm going to just share my screen real quick, and I understand that for some people it's probably going to be maybe a little bit difficult to see, but did that share okay, Dave? Just to make sure. Yep. Okay. So I'm just going to share. I'm good there. Yeah, so just building design at Oak Hill, but like you can see this is a main hallway if you can see my cursor kind of going through, but like we separated it out to like an employee area and an admin area, and then further down is basically like, we'll call it the mechanics work area, grinding room, refurbish room. But our one of our main keys was just workflow that, like an employee comes in the morning, location of time clock, mudroom, locker room, bathrooms rotated out into the lunchroom, break room area, and vice versa. So this hallway was really like the separation area, and then it really kind of came into admin, offices, conference room. But those guys that were working in that area could work flow out and go into the lunchroom, and the mechanics, the equipment technicians could work flow out. So without getting into detail of the shop and the design, It's just, I think those are some considerations that everybody needs to have is like, how is your shop going to flow? And, like if you do have a conference room, do you want 25 employees to walk past it while you're trying to have a greens committee meeting? And, like that gets into the subtle nuances of design. And, Phil, I'm going to hit it back up to you because you and I have talked about this a bunch in design, but like diving into the minutiae is like everybody talks about a maintenance facility, but then there's the whole other aspect of like FF&E and just like location of specific items, right? I mean, which really takes a lot of detailed work and time consuming to figure that out. So, I mean, if you want to expound on that a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, you think of the question that I always go back to is like in our industry is everybody always asks how much does a maintenance facility how much should you pay for your new maintenance facility, and they're so different. The site plans are different, but then like you never think of like the FF&E portion because you just want the new building, but you got to um, Dave, you're going to say it at some point, Phil needs a new desk. How much does a new desk for Phil cost? I'm just going to beat you to the punch. I knew it was coming. But, and by the way, I mean, this is like, we're not talking CEO style desk, but you just don't realize. And I know chairs, the office chair that I'm sitting in, you can buy at Office Max for $200. But if you go to an office furniture manufacturer, I mean, they wanted to sell this chair for $900. And I mean, this is a $150, $200 chair at Office Max all day long. But these office companies want to sell it for 200. Um, computers, and I can share my screen here in a minute, but FF&E is really, I think $400,000 for an FF&E budget is probably accurate, whether it's an 18-hole facility or 36-hole facility. We bought a lot of stuff on Amazon and a lot of that, we really value engineered that stuff and really did our homework and getting multiple quotes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important fact is that like, I know in our building, Cornerstone 1954, there wasn't a piece of furniture in that building that was worth salvaging. I think everything went into a dumpster.
Everything went into a dumpster.
Sorry, can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah, I heard you.
Okay. Yeah. And so, everything went into a dumpster. So like, we had a maintenance budget and we had an FF&E budget, but like if you're talking about like workstations for equipment technicians, you're talking tables, chairs, break room, you're talking, whether it's soap dispensers, you're talking, a lot of times the stalls for restroom facilities aren't included. The lockers that go in the locker room may or may not be included, might be part of your FF&E. Hose reels, pneumatic reels, like those aspects all need to be considered. And, from experience, those total up quick. So the lesson learned is, right, for people that are out there is make sure you do your due diligence on FF&E and have a dollar amount earmarked someplace within your budget.
I'm going to share my screen, Jeff, just to
Yeah.
see if we can get this right.
While Phil's sharing that, just so everybody on the call can recognize, we're using these backgrounds so you don't see Phil's chair. It's actually the first Lazy Boy recliner leather on wheels the office that I've ever seen at a golf course maintenance facility in my life.
Yeah, I knew it was coming, Dave. So here's a snapshot of our budget, and this is pretty much wrapped up right about at the beginning of July. But, you got break room chairs, there's probably 60 break room chairs, workbench, table, welding screens, lift tables, tire changers, vacuums, storage cabinets, pressure washers, obviously some different appliances. We have a washer and dryer room. The refrigerator we had to buy brand new, paper shredder, right, for $367. We put our compressed air system in our FF&E and purchased that separately, but when I probably never thought of this as an assistant superintendent, but like you get a flat tire and you just go to the compressor and fill it up. Like, how much does that stuff cost? And how many different airdrops do you want around your facility at garage doors or in the spray bay, to fill up tires to make it easier on your equipment managers? We got an ice machine, Dave. Um, round tables for the break room, and um, outfitting the assistant superintendent area with cubicles and stuff like that, iPads and computers. All that stuff factors in, and our grand total. And obviously, I'm over budget. I don't think I've hit a budget ever. But some of this stuff was club mandated. And the club really bought into this aspect that if we're going to build this multi-million-dollar facility, we want our employees to have the best. They didn't want us bringing over. Our computers were really messed up here in our whole network, which is one of the probably the greatest things that's happened through this. Is our whole network has been really dialed in now and technologically advanced, where all the computers from the whole entire club property are all tied into one. And I guess that could be good and bad in some instances, but for us, I think it's a real positive.
Yeah, no, I think it's good stuff, Phil. And I think those are good points too. Like we did the same thing with our compressed air. We bought that separate, fell into FF&E. Hey Dave, like when you're going through and you did a lot of the planning on your own, like how did you guys go through like when you're planning office space, like you want to make sure that the outlets in the right space. So you got to think about like where the desk is going to be and like if Ethernet drops or whatever else is going on, like what did you guys do to ensure that you guys kind of didn't have any faux pas at the end of the day?
Yeah, man. So I mean, way out of my bandwidth, and we just had a group of guys like our internal ground staff, and we just delegated this out and went down to, like one of the guys, like he downloaded some CAD related software, taught himself, and we built out every airdrop, every electrical cord, every size of everything. And like FF&E, we just assigned that, like, okay, the mechanics, we want a hydraulic fluid oil retention disposal system, right? Where with pneumatic drums, like, okay, guys, like get it done as cheap as we possibly can, but like make it good. So they all went, like, they got 5 or 6 quotes. They went to different areas. They got measurements, and they talked to the other employee who was building building all of the workbenches out of scrap steel that we bought and welding them and saying like the size of these, the width of these, is it going to reach where the hose has to go from the pneumatic system that you're just, and just really like can't say enough, man. It was a ton of work, but the ownership of it, that like the guys did it themselves, right? Brought that whole other like team aspect into it of the building that we initially built. And then when Mikey came on, like I think, for example, shout out to his dad. Like his dad built all of the lockers, like wooden, like sports team style lockers. So like we literally begged, borrowed, and stole as much as we. We had a guy rent a van, drive to some wholesale place in Michigan to get like steel shelving because it was, I don't know, a fifth of the cost of the cheapest stuff that we could buy, right? I mean, like
Sure.
that thing, but it was all driven. Like once we had this team buy-in, like, okay, this building and this refurbishment, it's going to be as good as we make it. So everybody just bought in and went 100%. And hats off to the guys. I mean, you've seen it for what those guys did in
it's great.
Really, really impressive.
Yeah. So, sorry, go ahead, Phil.
One of the things that I would say, I would chime in here, and I brought some notes with me to do this, was I established such a great relationship with the guys building our shop and the electricians and the plumbers. And before they did any of this work, they would always call me and Jeff, obviously I've learned from you and the best, but I was on site probably 12 hours a day, with these guys. And if they were putting electrical drops or, Cat 6 drops in an office, they would be like, is this where you want it? And is this how your desk is going to be set up? Is the airdrop, we're going to put the airdrop in today. Why don't you bring Jeff over or Seth over and make sure the airdrop's going exactly where he wants it? Because if we need to change it, now's the time to change it. And I think really with these projects, hands-on management, establish relationships with the contractors, become friends with them, and just really, dive into it. And then, they'll help you sort some stuff out. Like, where do you want your break room TV? And they got to put bracing in the wall, because it's metal studs. And let's make sure we get this stuff dialed in and get it right. And I think about the clubhouse, the employees have moved into the clubhouse now. And there's a lot of stuff that the employees, like the admin department, wasn't brought up to speed where their office was going to be, where they wanted their computer, where they wanted their desk. And now they're having to go back in and, redrop outlets in or redrop Cat 6 drops for computers and stuff like that. And it's a prime example of probably keeping some stuff in a vacuum to really being part of a project and being hands-on.
Yeah. So I want to hit on, oops, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, no, Jeff, if I may, on that perspective, from like the other end of doing the building like that, I mean, and this is a great option for clubs that are doing this from a budget conscious standpoint. It's like, everybody has, we have an HVAC guy at the club. We got an electrician at the club. We got a gas guy at the club. We got a communications guy at the club, right? Is that just leaning on those professionals? And like you said, Jeff, building that team, empowering them, and then working with them to what Phil just said. Again, like same conceptual philosophies that are used at these bigger, more formal construction, employ those same concepts down to these, smaller in-house self-done refurbishment type deals. Is build that team, be involved, delegate, and take ownership of it. Is that a lot of times you can come up with a great improvement at a fraction of the cost if there's a if there's a constraining budget.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And, it's kind of going to a little bit segue into another portion or another question I had. And, Phil, I'll fire this one at you is that, like building a new facility, I know that we did at Oak Hill, but like future considerations. And I know Dave and I have actually had conversations about this, but like, building a new maintenance facility sometimes, I mean, that's like a 50, 60-year endeavor for a club, right? Is that, future needs and how did you balance that into the plan, things that you may or may not have done that, I think is a really good consideration. But like what you guys do at Oakland Hills?
Yeah, it was a big conversation, and I think electrification of equipment was probably right up top. Luckily, I think a lot of these companies and where we're located in Detroit with Ford, Chrysler, and GMC being right here. I mean, they're talking about the same stuff here. They're building the same plants. They're building the same facilities for electrification. We just didn't feel comfortable in going full bore, but, our roof is rated for solar panels. That was one thing that our construction team here was really big on, like down the road. Can the roof handle, if we wanted to go solar in 10, 15 years, would the roof be suffice to hold it? We looked at geothermal stuff. Would it make sense to do geothermal here, or at least have the ability to do it? Generator, I think, we host major championships here, and we all know how important to having generators on site here. But the building's wired for a generator, and we've actually had we have a contract with a company here. If I lose power, I just dial the phone number and they bring me a generator for our shop. Just plug it in the back and up and run. Instead of buying a generator, I forget what the price was on the generator. I don't know if it was 300,000 in that neighborhood or something for this facility if we wanted a permanent one, but we just didn't feel like that was, what we needed at the time, but the future expansion stuff, I think we can add maybe 10,000 square feet to this if we need to in the future, whether it's on the ends, either end, the north or the east end or the west end, if we have to. That was real important for the club, and you know.
No, it's good. I mean, I think that a lot of guys don't think about that stuff, and I think it's smart to at least it can defer some costs later on down the road. You know what I mean, or allay some costs, I guess is a better word for that. Dave, how about you guys?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll kind of switch out of the past previous experience hat and put on my agronomic advisor's hat. Is that we've worked with Jeff, this obviously. We worked with
Hmm?
several different clubs that asked us to come in, help them evaluate facilities, give recommendations, what we're seeing, and a lot of that future use type stuff plays into this. So we kind of have a running list of things that we see that are new, conversations we have, and then on these various engagements, we pass those along, alter them, adjust them on a um, custom basis for each individual client. And Phil hit a lot of them. The one thing that I found is very, very important is duplicity of utility and infrastructure. So to Phil's point, obviously solar panels, electrification, power needs, all that kind of stuff. Can you have a backup power source fed from a separate generator or a separate power run? Can you have duplicity of potable water instead of doing a joint fire suppression potable water? Can you have duplicity of sewage? Believe it or not, can you have water storage tanks on site if you can't get potable and or irrigation water to the facility? You have a hurricane, you've lost water, you have to keep the greens alive. I mean, can you right? A lot of those different things that we see, and then just the last thing I'll touch on is just over engineering basic components. So like 6-inch gutters versus 4-inch gutters, 1.5-foot overhangs versus 1-foot overhangs, minimum overhead clearance of 12-foot doors, not 10-foot doors, right? I mean, spend the money on a free span truss versus posts in the middle of the building, right? Like those kind of, even though those are current decisions, they impact future variability of how the space is used and ensuring that it can be used under a variety of different potential environmental and or related issues that could arise and not impede not maintenance of the golf course, but also protection of the assets and the overall facilities of the club.
Yeah, and I would say size up wherever possible. You know what I mean? If you have a 6-inch main, if you can have an 8-inch main or a 4-inch main up to a 6-inch main, I think that when you're taking a look at like power, Phil talked about electrification and just making sure that you have an upsized transformer so that you can step up if you need to. And like the simple stuff that we do on the golf course. If you're laying down conduit, put an extra conduit in the ground. If you're putting, you know what I mean, just so that you have extra drop someplace. Like maybe you can't afford to have an electric gate to let people into your maintenance facility. Well, the best time to do it, to lay the conduit for that future project 5 years from now, might be today, right? I mean, just thinking ahead on those particular types of items are good. And I think you guys brought up a ton of really good stuff. Um, as we get to this, I wanted to talk about a little bit about post construction because we talked about ROI in the beginning, but like, what did you guys see? Like, and I know that I've heard you guys talk about it, but like, well, sorry, I don't mean to get confusing. Employee considerations. Like when you guys were in the design process and what you guys did, like thinking about your staff and your employees. I mean, what did you guys put first? Like, what are some of the things that you guys wanted to make sure that your staff had?
Yeah, I mean, I think we came from a facility that was very similar to yours at Oak Hill, Jeff. One one urinal for 57 men, a ladies' locker room that was a storage closet, plan closet, supply closet with a toilet in it. So we wanted to make sure, a locker room that I think it was leftover lockers from two clubhouse renovations ago. They were metal lockers. I don't even know if you could fit a jacket in them, let alone a Carhartt jacket. So stuff like that, making sure we had big athletic lockers that all the guys could fit all their gear in, every employee. We have 6 women's lockers in the women's locker room, showers, I think showers were probably some of the biggest upgrades that we did for the employees, and the amount of employees that take showers after a day's worth of work here is incredible to see. And I remember having that conversation with our committee, and they're like, "What do you need showers for?" And I'm like, "I think you would be surprised how many employees would take showers." Including myself. I live 20 minutes from here. If I have to go to a meeting, to go home, I mean, it turns into an hour and a half. The break room size, having plenty of refrigerators, coolers, ice machine. I thought the ice machine was big with these guys carrying the what do you call those Yeti things out on the golf course. So they weren't drinking the members' bottled water. I thought an ice machine was a huge upgrade for our employees. And I think the big thing in the flow of our shop was the safety built in, having the adequate space to hang up shovels, rakes, string trimmers, backpack blowers, and not getting hit by stuff as they were trying to hang something up, because it was like a puzzle every day at work. Hanging up a shovel, you might get hit by 3 rakes. And we pride ourselves on being neat and organized and clean, but it was very difficult. The safety aspect was something we really, really thought out.
Yeah, Dave, you got anything you want to add to that?
From the original planning of this, it was pretty easy for us, and I won't get into all the examples, but since our employees did it, I mean, like really like designed it and did it, we just empowered them to say, hey, listen, like take the restraints, the constraints off of this, optimize it, let's price it. We all know what the constraints are financially, and then empower them to and challenge them. Hey, if we want this, get it done.
Yeah.
Figure it out, right? So that led into some really, really cool employee-led, employee-driven ideas that were awesome. And then, for example, I know, Mikey just finished this recently. And as we keep evolving and adding over time at Oakland, he just built a small gym. They built it themselves. They framed in a piece of fertilizer bay, they just redid the gym. At the club, they got some old equipment there. I think they bought some used stuff, some new stuff, some wholesale stuff. It's funny because there's not enough weight in there for me, Phil, to actually go in there and work out. Joking, obviously. But to those type things, Jeff, it was really cool, man. Once again, like the ownership, the team aspect of it, the guys drove it. We empowered them, challenged them, and a lot of those cool operational, I don't want to say amenities, but operational things that led to quality of life, quality of workmanship, pride, accountability, really came from within, which was really, really neat.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that, like even if it's simple and if you're on a budget and, like that, like a workout facility is great, but like even just having, washer and dryer where guys can it's pouring down rain and guys can use a dryer to dry off whatever they have. Oversized lockers, like Phil had mentioned, vending machines and having the electrical outlets, you know what I mean? I mean, refrigerator, busy coolers for storing lunch, things of that nature, which you think are simple and take for granted, but Dave, you and I visit a lot of maintenance facilities, and I would say the overwhelming majority are not employee friendly or employee centric, and a lot of second purpose buildings and things of that nature. So adding those and thinking about the employees and maybe even sitting down and having a conversation with them about like what you guys would like to see the maintenance facility is always a good idea. I know Ryan's going to jump in here in a little bit, but I want to talk to you guys about like we talked about ROI at the beginning, coming full circle. Like, what were the benefits that you guys have seen from doing these projects? On top of operational efficiency, but what are some ROI items that you guys have seen with your maintenance facility? I'm sure they're numerous.
You want me to go, Dave?
Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, I think recruiting versus retaining, right? I think it's a recruiting tool for one. Even for our membership, it's funny that we've hosted a lot of committee meetings down here for all different committees, and one of the committees is like the membership committee. They bring prospective members in here, show them around the clubhouse while the well, show them around the maintenance facility while the clubhouse is under construction and they can't go in. And, we've had breakfast with Santa in our maintenance facility. We've had a huge member party, grand opening per se, with a band of like 400 people in here this summer. So the membership, the return on investment in our situation with no clubhouse was immense. I mean, the members didn't have anywhere to gather. It was probably one of the best parties they said in the history of Oakland Hills when we had our grand opening. Um, so stuff like that. I know when they give a tour of the grounds right now, they give them a tour of the maintenance facility. It's something that the members can't believe. They're like, if the maintenance facility is this good, what is the clubhouse going to look like? What does the golf course look like? What does the pool look like? So it's really, stuff like that. Um, and I think, I know you didn't want me to touch base on it, but the efficiency on the golf course was, through the roof. And, we got into July, Jeff, I think we'd been in here since May 17th. And it was like right around that 4th of July, 10th of July, when the shit's really hitting the fan, right? Where it's make or break, what's going to go on here. And we were performing at such a high level, I couldn't put my thumb on it at first because I'm like, we haven't done anything agronomic. We're still doing the same, using the same equipment, same people, but it was the efficiency and what we were getting stuff done, and and the pride in doing everything, So that's my story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Dave?
I mean, just quickly to touch on in our, different scenario a little bit. Pride is the big thing. These guys did it themselves, right? And that culture of that, I found that confidence then, like, hey, we just like look back over what we just did. And no one thought we could do it this nice, this good for this amount of money. Like, look at that. Like that spilled over into the golf course, where something may have been a more daunting task, right? Is that like once you have that confidence as an employee, as a person, whatever it might be, then the heart rate gets lower when you're in those stressful situations on the golf course, or when you're looking at an insurmountable task that, hey, if we all just band together, we can overcome this, because look what we just accomplished. And that leads into the ownership aspect of it, of not only the maintenance and care of the facility, but also the golf course. Whereas, to use the football analogy, the locker room started policing itself. Not like the employee break room, locker room, like, play on words, right? The team were policing themselves. And from the membership aspect, just like, wow, can't believe these guys pulled this off in this time frame with everything else going on, with this amount of funding. Like, and then that led to more credibility into different projects, different things, of much newer relationships where, I don't want to say non-management level employees became and established great relationships with members, board members, committee members, executives, stakeholders at the club, because hey, who's the guy who designed this, XYZ in the mechanics facility? How did you guys think about changing this room into that room and blowing this wall? I'm like, oh, that's Jimmy. And they're like, wow, like, what's his background? I'm like, hey, he's been working here for 5 years. He used to work at whatever, pick it. And they're like, whoa. And then those relationships formed. It's just, that whole culture of all of those things, sitting back and watching that organically happen, I think was the most rewarding aspect out of the benefits. The ROI, Jeff, much more qualitative approach, but that's what, looking back, was, I think, the most rewarding.
Yeah. I know that, there was some of those SOBs that voted no for the maintenance facility project at Oak Hill. There were the same guys that were touring their friends around to the facility, showing them what we had built, and, like how much of an upgraded facility. So, yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to add to that from a standpoint of, like, recruiting, retention, all of that stuff, and operational efficiencies go through the roof. And that is a very difficult aspect, I think, in when you're looking for approval on a new maintenance facility to get guys to sign off on because it's really hard to quantify. But man, I tell you what, once you get it, it is significant, in my opinion. Yeah. So Ryan, I think we're at a point where, I think we've covered a lot of topics here. We kept guys busy and occupied for an hour. So if we have any questions, I think we're ready for them.
Okay, well, no questions yet, but now is a good time. So please start entering those in the chat if you have any. One question, what are your total compound acreages?
It's a good question.
Yeah. So our total compound acreage is probably about 2 acres. And it's really, I would call it, there's easement challenges with the road, a major roadway right by us. And then the south course right to our south. So, and that's the one thing I've learned for everybody on the call is like site plan challenges. I think everyone that I've talked to, whether it was Wingfoot and definitely Marion comes into play, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we were just shy of 2 acres, Phil. I think your compound is a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
Dave, you know how big your compound is, Dave?
Of Google Earth right now to put a polygon around it. Yeah, I want to say, yeah, we got. I mean, overall, it's spread out, right? I'm going to say probably looks like 3.5 to 4 acres.
Hmm.
Several different buildings, very unorthodox. Who's ever seen it? And that includes parking, employee parking, club staff parking down in that area. Our hall is, we would call it the grounds compound per se.
Yeah.
So far, that's all we got. So we'll give it a little longer here, see if any others come in.
Yeah, I think that, I think Jim Pavanetti made a comment earlier too that, we didn't hit on, but like he had mentioned, one of the best things that he did was to hold a Greens Committee meeting down at his facility. I think that's world class. I think that is a great idea. As many people you can get through the door of a facility that's aging or needs work or needs to be completely redone. Get the decision makers down there, host a board meeting, host a Greens Committee meeting. Um, then they start to understand what type of conditions your guys are in every day. I think it's a great idea. And thanks for that comment, Jim.
One just came into the Q&A. How did you create relationships with municipalities to move permits through?
Well, I'll start off with this one is that, like we always had a pretty open dialogue with our local municipalities just because of major championships. So we started those conversations way ahead of time to tell them what we were thinking about and things of that nature. And, like there was a lot of things that they completely ixnayed. Like we were talking about having intern housing within the facility, second floor. They wouldn't move off an elevator requirement, and it added a whole ADA complexity that would have just taken our costs and elevated them. So, I mean, they were tough on some issues and they were pretty open on others, but like I actually think that the toughest one that we had to deal with personally was the fire marshal. They were the most difficult when it dealt with, gas and oil storage, having enough clearance around the buildings, the fuel storage, things of that nature. It was, in my experience, that person there was no swaying that person. They had a set of rules, and that's what they were doing. I don't know, Dave, Phil, what you guys had.
Fine, Jeff, I'm going to take the fire marshal as a dig at Oakland Hills. I think you set me up for that one. Our situation was truly unique. And again, obviously the major championship component here, Um, the town officials were really sensitive to getting Oakland Hills back on its feet, and they really wanted to streamline the process here. Obviously, we had to follow codes and rules and restrictions, and they really wanted to help us through the process. I think our doings here, part of it was really sensitive to what had occurred, but the fire marshal was probably the biggest one. And obviously, we wanted to abide by that with what had happened here. Everything here, the contractors really handled all the permitting and all that stuff, and it's been really seamless. So I don't have any like negative stories to tell. They really wanted to work with Oakland Hills. There's a couple issues. The one issue, there's a fence that goes around our property and it had barbed wire on it. One of the rules is before they sign the CO for the property, we had to remove the barbed wire and paint the fence. They would not give us CO for everything that we built here. So it was like kind of like a little give and take, but it's great for the community that we neatened up our property edges. Landscaping was a big one too on the outer edges of what this looked like in the community. And we've always wanted it to work great, but these budgets, they get bigger and bigger and bigger when the townships want something like, hey, we want the landscaping around, a mile to look better. Well, what does that look like? That's like, that's millions of dollars what it looks like, or a new fence around Oakland Hills. It's like a $3 million investment when it's all said and done with. So there's some concessions being made on some certain stuff. Yeah, that's our
Dave, did you even consult the local local authorities at all about what you did?
Yeah, I was, can't say enough about the town of Oakmont, and actually most of 97% roughly of the acreage of Oakmont Country Club resides within Plum Borough. And, we relied heavily on long-standing relationships with not only regulatory officials within those governing bodies, but also within kind of like the adjunct entities like our local power company, the local water authorities, inspectors, things like that, where how do you classify what the building is? Is it storage? Does it have occupancy? Does it not? We work through a lot of those gray areas in conjunction with all of the local municipalities. And, looking back, we definitely fulfilled all the requirements and were very respectful. And they were extremely great to work with and respectful of our process also. But decisions were made along the way, like you said, Jeff, that would not trigger certain regulatory aspects that kind of help streamline and simplify a lot of the inspections and regulatory processes.
We've got a couple more in here. Next is, what were some of your non-negotiables for your shop?
Coming in from Kyle Steidel.
Yeah.
You want to hit it first, Jeff, or you want me to hit it?
I'd be happy to hit it. And then pass along to you. But like, I think the non-negotiables was the size and space. You know what I mean? We wanted to make sure that we planned for the future, so the club wasn't coming back and spending money down the road. But and then I think that some of the other non-negotiables was making sure that the employees that were grinding on a day-to-day basis were taken care of. If that meant we're spending more on oversized lockers, if we're doing a bigger break room, if we had more televisions, things of that nature. They had AC in certain areas. We weren't going to limit that, so when, whether it's the equipment technicians or whoever, everybody had a good place to like sit down and eat and relax for the 30 minutes that they get for lunch. And some of that stuff was just like absolute non-negotiables. And the other thing too is that we knew Oak Hill was as part of their DNA to host championships, similar to Oakland Hills and Oakmont, is that we did a lot of like tournament build out within our building, meaning we had 3-phase drops on the outside of the building, extra lighting. so that we knew that every 5 to 10 years when they had an event that the build out was just seamless, easy. Electrical equipment was all taken care of. So like some of that stuff was just had to happen, non-negotiable.
Yeah. I think some of the stuff for me that I looked at was some of the stuff that we were getting, maybe I don't want to say fought on, but value engineering, right, became a big part because our project was looped into the clubhouse, and they had a budget. The block on the outside of the building, someone said, why don't we just, do siding right down to the end? And I was like, well, carts are going to run into it. We want to do like 8 courses a block or 8 foot tall, or I think that's right. Bollards around garage doors is a big one. Believe it or not, I wanted polished concrete floors. I thought the appearance of those, and then, I think they're sealed with a petroleum sealer for like oil leaks, gas leaks, and stuff like that was a big one for us. That I fought tooth and nail on, and that comes in at like a $250,000 price tag. So when you're value engineering stuff, that stuff can get whacked out pretty easily, because it's a big number. I think hot water in the chemical storage area for a hot rinse, or washing jugs out was a big one for me. Believe it or not, this stuff probably sounds like low hanging fruit. Like, why couldn't you get this stuff? But when you're value engineering something, everything's on the board, and wherever they can take a whack on it, they'll take a whack on it.
Next, we have what are some of the things that are a must-have in a new chemical facility? And also, do you have any ideas with integrating new technology into the chemical mix facility?
You guys can have at that one.
Yeah, so I think mixed tanks is a must-have. For sure, we use Cinetech. I think there's a couple different companies out there that are doing stuff, and I really went with Cinetech from my experience at Oak Hill, and what they've done. I think there's some other good ones out there, and I was really comfortable working with the people at Cinetech out of Philadelphia or the Pennsylvania area. I think that's a must-have. I think you got to look at containment, and again, this brings me right back to my time at Oak Hill Country Club, and having sumps and containing all your liquid fertilizer in the event of a spill is huge, to make sure we're in compliance with Michigan, and our employees are safe. I think that's it for me. Having hot water, was a big one, and obviously proper pipe sizing in the mixed chemical area, so you can get water quickly. You're not trying to do it through 3/4 inch pipe, so to say. I think our water feed in there might be, it's definitely 2 inch. I mean, we're filling up 80-gallon mix tanks in like 3 seconds. So I think those are must-haves, proper pipe sizing for sure.
Jump in on the back of Phil. It looks like what Jock Peterson answered that question. Jock, I keep referring to Mike McCormick at Oakmont, but as I was kind of transitioning out and he was really taking over, they did Jeff's seen it, Phil's seen it too. Mike pretty much designed a brand new pesticide fertilizer facility, and it is as good as I've ever seen. And as far as the must-haves go, that and him and I, talked through this several times, is space, being able to drive through the building, not backing. I mean, I'm considered one of the best operators in golf course history, but I've probably broken, I don't know, dozens of booms and nozzles, right? Trying to move sprayers and spray hawks in, not a building. So must have space, drive through, water pressure and water flow, individual electric mix tanks was a great idea. Individual mixing bays within a big open facility. Again, duplicity of water source, duplicity of power, large access from chemical storage or from pesticide storage and fertility storage into the mixing area. where the efficiency of moving bulk materials with carts and skid steers while you're mixing and having the room to do that, cut down on just, I mean, the efficiency, the time of all that. But I don't want to, solicit Mike's time on this, but anybody that's seen that new facility that they kind of pretty much designed and once again, did themselves most of it, it is as good as I've seen. As Jeff mentioned, we're blessed to see a lot of different places across the United States. As far as technology goes, having storage areas within the facility that are climate controlled, moisture controlled, to house, store, and work on any of the new GPS, electric solenoid nozzle induced technology, right? Like GPS components, is that extra screens, wires, solenoids, electrical components being stored on like a metal shelf in the middle of a 4,000 square foot space where hoses are flying, water's flying left and right. I think just having the ability to evolve those spaces to handle, work on, and store some of these higher price, more electrical, technologically driven components is a very, very strong consideration now and obviously in the future moving forward.
Yeah, I would say, like one thing, and it's not necessarily technologically advanced, but like one thing I think that's underappreciated in a maintenance facility, especially in those chemical mix load areas in your equipment managers' facilities, is lighting. Man, like having good, proper lighting and having it at the right height above benches, desks, things of that nature, is one of those things. I know that was a regret in our old facility that we had to do a lot of changes on, is the lighting, if
Yeah.
nothing else.
One of the, this isn't technological advanced, was proper spacing. So our liquid fertilizer and pesticides is separated from our dry, flowable, granular fertilizer and pesticides. Completely separate rooms. But I think having adequate space to move around in those areas, whether it's with a forklift, skid steer, we bought those big carts like that you see at Home Depot that we got from Uline for our employees to load up, for spraying Quali Pro products by the pallet. We want to be able to load up, these, I don't know what you call them, Home Depot shopping carts, where we can put basically 30 cases of product on there, and the guys don't have to carry 90 pounds around a facility. They're rolling it in a shopping cart, so to say. I wouldn't call it, groundbreaking technology, but, thought out so we can move around safely, efficiently, and not be bumping into stuff and, blowing out backs.
What last thing, I just looked at some notes here on my other monitor. Marine plugs on pretty much as electric mix tanks having marine rated plugs like you see on like the old school fan power below ground boxes where you plug in, right? Those, and then as much valving as you possibly can. A lot of people are now running overhead valving, overhead water lines with drop down hose reels. It's just being able to isolate, like over engineer the ability to isolate as much as possible. It's not a question of if something's going to break, it's a question of obviously when, and to be able to operate. And it's always going to happen at the worst time, obviously. So being able to isolate your water sourcing to a very granular level, I think is a really, really strong consideration also.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're almost at an hour and a half here. It looks like that's our last question in the queue. So looks like we're at a good stopping point. And so
Yeah. Hey, Ryan, can I just interject one quick thing? Is that for any of you guys that might be in the process of design, planning, things of that nature, I know Phil's super generous with all of his information. I still have all our building plans from Oak Hill. Happy to share some stuff. If you guys want to reach out, happy to pass those documents along. Just, I would say, email Phil, Dave, Rye. I mean, we do have a plethora of information. We're here to help. So feel free to reach out if that's necessary.
Yeah, please do.
Thanks,
Phil,
Jeff.
Phil can also give you the lead on the leather Lazy Boy office chair with the wheels on it. Do you have the massaging leg rest also, Phil, or no? Did you?
I called this so early this morning, Dave. This is so priceless that you're living up to what I said like 8 hours ago.
I'm done. Ron. Sorry.
You're good, buddy.
No, that's great. And yeah, thanks, Jeff. Please, everyone, don't hesitate to reach out. And just on behalf of QualiPro, I want to thank our panelists today for their time. So thank you all very much. We greatly appreciate it, and hope everyone enjoyed this session. The recording will be on the website with the others if you want to forward along to your colleagues. And we hope to see you at the next session. So thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it, Ryan. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, guys. A lot of fun.